Hi folks, Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Birgit, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ryan. It's great to be here.
So Birgit, tell us a little bit, we'll get into Patagonia Provisions, but what were you kind of doing? How did you get into this work of food, and sort of how did you what's the backstory to how you got involved with Patagonia Provisions?
Depends on how deep you want to go there. Certainly started at an early age. My grandfather was in coffee. My dad was in food, global import-export food. We had land up in north of Toronto where we farmed, made friends with the local farmers and got milk and grew things and made things. And it was super cool. Fast forward a bit to the future after working in food a little bit, going down a design road, interior architecture and branding, started my own company, a food company, and then started to talk with Yvonne Chouinard and Rose Marcario. Rose Marcario is our CEO of Patagonia as a whole. Obviously, Yvonne Chouinard is our founder. And we started to talk about what a food company could look like for Patagonia. Yvonne had definitely been thinking about food for a very long time, and having been in agriculture through the apparel side of the business with wool, Ulex, cotton, hemp, it really was apparent along the way that food related to agriculture was the biggest contributor to climate issues. And so he couldn't stay away. He said, I really want to build out this side of the business because food touches everybody. And so we started to hatch the plan around what that could look like for an apparel company to go into food.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
And that was 7 years ago? Is that when?
7 years ago, I wrote the business plan with Rose and Yvonne, and our first product was launched in fall of 2013. So from there, we just built product after product to about now 23 SKUs, and we're going to be 30 SKUs coming up on the next few months, all based on solutions to the problem at hand. So building out product not for trend, but really to highlight a solution to a problem. So the salmon, for instance, is about saving wild salmon, making sure we have wild salmon in our future. And so the methods that we use to help that to happen are what we highlight, and where we catch it. And we put together a scientific advisory around it to make sure that these are really truly the methods that will provide wild salmon in the future. Buffalo jerky is about saving the Great Plains, making sure that people understand how important the prairie is as an ecosystem. Some might even say it's equal to or even more important than the rainforest. And we know about the rainforest and the carbon sequestration that happens there, but we're not necessarily tuned into our own prairie in the U.S. And then the veg and fruits and other products are really geared toward highlighting regenerative organic practices. That's a big driver for how we go about making things. So it's definitely a combination of things that are really to illustrate a better path forward in the food industry.
And is that the larger vision, is to sort of shift the food industry? What's sort of the grand vision for Provisions?
Yeah, the grand vision is really to shift things. I think that we are definitely at a point in time where we know a lot about how to do a tremendous variety of things in the food business. We have technology that allows us to make a meatball in a lab. We know how to work on genetics. We know how to do all sorts of things. And what we really feel is that maybe we're at a point where we need to recalibrate, take a look at all those things and say, what are the things that make sense to put into the basket for the future? And what are things that we can learn from the past with native communities, with really addressing the soil, health of the soil, and substantiating that, putting that into the basket, and making brave decisions about maybe shelving some of these innovations, even though they could be huge moneymakers. And that's a difficult conversation to have. But we really believe that if we keep going down the road that we are with the food industry, that we will not have a really viable future for our children. We are degrading our soil at tremendous rates. We are putting pesticides in, killing the ecosystems. And that residue is actually coming into our food. We've tested food, our food and conventional ag food, and it's very clear there are these pesticides coming in. So it's a real problem that requires just sort of a moment to step back, take a look at it, and take a hard look and move forward in a different way. So if we can pull together products and work with farmers and scientists and others that are like-minded around this, and show that there's a path that is better, then that's really the big purpose, that in the end we really can change the world, because it is that sweeping statement because of the impact that the food industry does make in health of the planet. So,
yeah. And how do you choose? Like probably up until now or recently, it's like Yvonne's like, all right, we're gonna do almonds. It's like sort of like Yvonne just deciding. But like, how do you really decide? Like, choose which areas? There's probably so many areas you could go into. What's the sort of process for evaluating what to do?
The best way is really to look at the science that's out there. So we surround ourselves with nonprofits and people in the scientific community, people like Wes Jackson at the Land Institute, who is really working on perennial agriculture, people like Steve Jones up at the Bread Lab at WSU, who has 40,000 alternative grains and other crops that we could put into the system. We are working with fishermen and with, say, the Wild Fish Conservancy, Kurt Beardsley there, on health of the ocean issues. And so if we start in that place, the answers about what to make start to reveal. Like, for instance, with the ocean lately, besides the salmon story, we've been going down the road of eating lower on the fish chain. So the data shows we need to do that. We can't keep putting pressure on tuna and the big fish out there. And what we should be doing is going toward the smaller fish and things like mussels. So we went out with a mussel product in 3 different flavors to really highlight that these are absolutely delicious options to steer us away from what we've gotten used to, like a can of tuna always. And sardines, mackerel, line extensions to those will be important. Those are also a little bit lower on the fish chain that will help us with that the abundance of fish in the ocean that we need that are actually being depleted.
I heard that Patagonia has a second beer. Tell us about that.
We just launched Longroot Wit, and that's our second in a series of Kernza beer that we'll be going out with. That is really all about the work with the Land Institute, with Wes Jackson and the folks at the Land Institute who are working on perennial agriculture, plants that can stay in the ground for a longer period of time so that we don't have the emissions from plowing under the soil with tractors every year, that kind of thing, that we're not disturbing the soil, which is a really important topic, ecosystem that needs to be considered a living and breathing entity as opposed to just a medium to grow food. And so the beer, Kernza beer, Longroot Ale, and Longroot Wit, those are our two beers that we went out with to really tell that story and hope that others will take on these actions of looking at alternative grains like that can really work on soil health rather than just using the same ingredients all the time. The other thing is that it does provide a really interesting flavor. It's nutty and spicy and delicious, and so the ingredients that we choose working with these kinds of entities, they also need to be real contributors to flavor, and what do they tell us they would be best in terms of what kind of product. And Kernza happened to be really suited to beer. And besides, there's no better way than to talk about these kinds of stories than maybe grab a beer and tell somebody about why Kernza is important, or what even the hell is Kernza. So, yeah.
Now, does Provisions do anything? I know Yvonne was really into seaweed for a while. I'm not sure if he's still into seaweed, but do you all do anything with seaweed?
Anything ocean. Yvonne is like right there. Yes. Yeah. We are experimenting right now with some seaweed products and see some good things coming down the road along those lines. So I think that's the other piece, is not to go always to the protein, the animal protein, that there are plenty of resources in the ocean that can be tremendously nutritious food. And again, that's the part of that shift that we all have to think about taking, which is less meat, more plant protein, and those kinds of cultural shifts are really imperative for this movement to really take hold in a positive way. Doesn't mean you have to give up everything. It just means maybe less of one, more of the other, shifts that we can all take on in our personal lives quite easily.
Now, one of the things that's probably the biggest impact for Patagonia Provisions is the supply chain. And so how do you decide whether a potential supplier meets your criteria? Is there a really thorough vetting process, or how do you really consider what makes a supplier good enough for Provisions? I imagine this checklist for suppliers for a general company is somewhat thorough, but I imagine for Provisions, you must have a really in-depth checklist of what qualifies someone as environmentally or socially up to your standards. And so just giving, if there's any insight you have on, what that process looks like, or how you go about choosing folks to work with.
We do an extensive audit on all the suppliers, all the farmers, the ranchers, the fishermen that work with us. It's really important that the practices that they are applying are ones that really fall within our criteria. And so really surrounding ourselves with scientists and NGOs that can help guide us is one part of it. And then it's specifically around soil. So our method of choosing who we work with and the controls and criteria that we put in place to make sure that we're going down the road in the way we intended is to activate our environmental team, our folks that are working on regenerative organic certified, and making sure that we adhere to things like number one, base organic standard. So they have to be adhering to organic standards, certainly not incorporating pesticides. And what we actually prefer in terms of the farmers is if they're taking things a little bit further. So because there is so much science and data around soil as the living being with, more microbes in a teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet. We've heard that a lot. It's an ecosystem that really needs to be cared for. So what are the farmers doing to add on to a basic organic standard that will allow that soil to really build topsoil, to really have all the micronutrients and the fungi and all that stuff working? And that those things are called regenerative practices, meaning that you're starting to build topsoil, that you're really not putting any inputs in, you're not tilling, or it's low till. There are a number of ways to go about this, intercropping. There's all sorts of things depending on where you are. So it depends on the region. It depends on the type of soil you have. There's so many factors. So we look at all of those depending on where the farmer or rancher is located, and make sure that it really is producing that outcome, which is very, very healthy soil, therefore very healthy ingredient to put into a product. And then also other factors like animal welfare and social well-being. So are the farmers treated fairly? Are the animals in a CAFO situation, or in the case of our buffalo jerky, it's a mobile situation where they're going out into the fields and taking down the animal right there without that horrible stress around shipping them on a truck to some facility that they're all jammed into a location. So those kinds of practices we are very aware of, and we work with Fair for Life and Animal Standard community and the organics community and scientists to make sure that we carefully vet out each of these providers.
Excellent. And you mentioned regenerative organic certification. I don't think many folks maybe know what that is. Can you tell us what is regenerative organic certification?
Sure. Regenerative Organic Certified is basically a holistic agricultural certification that encompasses robust requirements for soil health, social fairness, and animal welfare. Really, the big one that is relatively new now is the soil health component. We've heard a lot about fair trade, Fair for Life, those things. We know about animal welfare standards, but we haven't really treated soil health in a way that is talked about widely or even understood widely. But according to Rodale, the Rodale Institute, and other entities out there, very many globally, if all current farmland and pasture shifted to regenerative organic practices, then 100% of annual carbon dioxide emissions could be sequestered in the soil. So there are a lot of people debating, exactly the measurements around that, but it's so huge. Paul Hawken talks about it in his book. There's such hope in that. And so this standard, the Regenerative Organic Certified, is really a North Star. It's meant to be part of the organic standards, but then it's added components to that to get to the North Star of what would it be like if the soil ecosystem was at its highest bar, living, breathing function. What would that do? And what it does for, say, farmers who are working with soil, it can use up to 6 times less water, which means the farmer saves money. If you're not having chemicals, you are saving pollinators who are responsible for 1/3 of our food supply. You're not having sick farmers and workers because they're not having to deal with chemicals. You are using 45% energy savings by going down this road. And that in times of drought, you have a 31% higher yield over chemical ag in that scenario. So there are so many reasons to say, let's build something that really lifts organic. When we're at a time where we have organic, is experiencing a lot of downward pressure, the addition of hydroponics, for instance, or for CRISPR, for these things that move organic standard away from the original intent. So if we can say, look, this is something that helps lift it up toward what we ultimately would love to see because of the benefits, then I think we've created something that will be beneficial to all, beneficial to the organic standard and beneficial to the planet as a whole, obviously. And then the trinity of soil health, social fairness, and animal welfare. If a farmer can really adhere to all of those components, then they can put the certification on their ingredient or their product. So that's what that's all about. It's
That's
pretty
amazing.
complex, but it's really, it's something where we built a coalition. There are many brands, not just us, doing this, coming together for this Regenerative Organic Alliance to take this on and to build pilots, to prove it out, to continue to include scientists and institutions that are really putting this into practice and confirming the data for us. So it's tremendously hopeful.
Are there products already certified regenerative organic, or is it still in the pilot phase?
Not yet. It's in pilot phase still. We're looking at probably seeing some Patagonia Provisions products out in the fall that will be regenerative organic certified. And other companies who are part of the alliance, like Dr. Bronner's, will also be coming in with certain products that they have worked to get to that place as well. So it'll be an evolutionary process, aggregating all of those products together and creating for us a little marketplace that will highlight all of that effort and those products. So people can come to this place of, this is what we stand for.
Yeah.
Move it away from price wars. Amazon really starts to put pressure on farmers and produce, and as we move toward many people shopping online, it's just going to get bigger and bigger. There's just so much pressure to play with price, and I think that really hurts the farmers and the ranchers and the fishermen and the people making the effort to move in a better way. A lot of complications around that. So I think it would be great if people came on board to, understand some of these facts that might intrigue them to move down this road of better choices that can help, their lives, their kids' lives, that kind of thing.
What are you seeing in terms of the sales channels for provision stuff? Is it mostly in the Patagonia retail stores, or is it online, or what are you sort of seeing around what's strong or what's growing for you?
We started out direct, so we had in our stores and online, and then of course there's the no-brainer piece of it, which is, you're an outdoor company, you must be making only outdoor food. And what we realized is that what we were making was so nutritionally dense and really delicious because it's organic, because we think about region and all these factors, that it could live really well outside of that norm and in the grocery scenario. So an everyday component. We don't put in fillers and extra salt and other things that other outdoor companies might to make something an outdoor food. We actually just make really good, whole, delicious food. And so therefore it has a life outside of that direct Patagonia outdoor world. And so you can find it at Whole Foods, you can find it at Good Earth in the Bay Area, you can find it at New Seasons. So really all across the country, we're expanding tremendously in that category. So it's really terrific to see that and see people embracing this as something that can, go beyond the outdoor scenario. So
yeah, that's exciting too.
Yeah.
And do you find it feels like there's so many bars or just how do you really stand apart from, you were at Expo West recently, there's probably 500 bars in one room being sold. So how do you really balance that, with it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, many of the categories in food are super crowded, and bars for sure. That's crazy. Why would we think of making a bar in that kind of scenario? But I think, as number one, our bar, there are very few bars out there that can say this, but our bar has 0 pesticides in it. So as a mom who has kids, who puts bars in her kids' lunch every day, that's really important to me. And I would think that maybe that's important to others. And, some of the brands that we all love and we've had as part of our lives for a long time, that's not the case. Some people are moving to that direction of 0 pesticide, of organic practices, of better than organic practices, but they're very few. So for us, it was about really solving that problem, saying, look, we need something that is healthier, that is better, that doesn't have residue of these pesticides or glyphosate, and really just an honest and good product that is, say, for this one, it's portable fruit and nuts. We will expand on those as we learn more about the different kinds of proteins that are coming in, and we'll create more bars. But we don't really want to be out there just to make a bar for bar's sake. You can't really win in that category if you're going to do that. It's just far too crowded and some really established players. But we like our bar. We think it's pretty good.
You do have a $1 billion brand behind the name already, so it's a good place to start.
It kind of helps, but we have to really live in our own right as well, right? Yeah. That's an awesome halo to have, but if the food isn't good, it's not going to have longevity out there no matter what our name is, right? So building it to be super delicious is king. Yeah.
Yeah. And what are you, just generally about the work, what are you most excited about? What are you getting most energized by?
I'm really energized by how we're able to build out more and more products that we just launched, this long root wit that can continue to tell the stories. So as we build out these products, we just keep making more and more relationships, and we are finding that the momentum is growing, that there are more farmers and more people out there really wanting to embrace these practices, the better practices, because they understand now what the ramifications are fully from the way we have been doing things. And so that is just super exciting, super thrilling. As Yvonne says in our film Unbroken Ground, all these people moving in the same direction, you can't believe what we can accomplish. That gives me goosebumps every single time, because that's exactly what I see happening. People are knowing more and they're making changes. And so that's sort of thrilling to see the momentum, that the revolution happening, a much needed one.
Yeah. I think, Yvonne, for folks who haven't seen the movie Unbroken Ground, it's really good. You should see that movie, the documentary. I guess it's not really a movie, but
yeah, you can see it online. It's 25 minutes, and it really just highlights, a compilation of the folks we're working with and how we're going about building product.
Yeah. I think he has some other quotation in there around nature thrives on diversity, whereas most of our food is like monocropped. And for some reason, it struck me that was pretty profound, and that we seem to have food backwards.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's so critical in all of this, right? That nature needs diversity. Well, it goes even deeper than that. It's there's a great quote from Nathaniel Rich in the New York Times. He's a writer in the New York Times, and he says, "Homo sapiens was the first species to alter the environment that sustained us to the point that it might not sustain us anymore." And that, to me, when I read that, it was such encompassing of this idea about how we're so interconnected with ecosystems, that when you think of a good example might be the salmon. Salmon need to be caught in tributaries that lead up to and mouths of the river leading up to the rivers that they go back up to spawn in. And that way you can count how many fish you can take and how many you let go up the river. Then the bears, the animals who feed off of those fish, can be fed and have the nutrition that they need. Then the carcass gets dropped on the forest floor, and then the forest requires that to actually flourish. So it's this cycle that is just so incredibly important. And if you take one piece of that away, the whole thing starts to unravel. And so with monoculture, it's kind of what we've done, right? We've taken a very diverse environment where we had really great economic stimulation in little rural towns across the U.S. and around the world, and we had the farmer, the brewer, the miller, the baker, all working together and connected. There was market pull for the farmer. There was a place to make something. There was a place to sell something. And then that went away when we decided that we were going to just convert all farmland to this, one crop here and one crop there. And so we no longer had the diversity that is required in that. And so that fell apart, and you've got rising farmer suicide. You've got, health issues. You have a sick planet because we've taken away, again, another example of diversity. So it's sort of a law of life, it feels like, in all aspects and all vantage points, whether it's a community, an economic stimulation of a little community, whether it's a species that we need to keep alive and available in our future, whether it's soil that we're just killing and looking at as a medium to just keep putting inputs of chemicals in, rather than letting the diversity of what it should be thrive. All those little microbiome, enzymes, fungi, worms, all those things, that they all live for each other and connected to each other. So that is it's something we really have to think about in a different way. All these, the diversity of ecosystems, and then the diversity within the ecosystems. So you have, maybe I should say that differently, the diversity of ecosystems that depend on each other. And then within those ecosystems, there's this incredible balance of diversity. So that gets really complicated, and I can get really nerdy about it, but it's so clear to me that if we just pay attention to that and make decisions with our businesses around that kind of thinking, we can have a better future. Did that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. The other thing I was going to say around that, what Yvonne said, was it actually helped me think about businesses and, in a way, a lot of our businesses or like how we operate are also monocultural in terms like we don't really have much ethnic or cultural diversity in like our teams. And so it's been actually that Yvonne quotation's been helpful thinking about, like, I think offices and businesses thrive on diversity, women and people of color, as opposed to like the just all the white guys in the room. It's just not a diverse and helpful environment.
Yeah, look at our political system.
Yeah.
Yeah, the same thing. That's why I say it's a running theme for life in general, that we need this, whether it's an office system or an agricultural system or whatever. It is really an essential ingredient, and absolutely that's how we've approached Patagonia and building Patagonia Provisions, and of course Yvonne originally building Patagonia, in all ways of thinking, whether it's our community of people or the types of problems we set out to solve. We incorporate that concept of diversity.
Yeah. So in the last 5 or 10 minutes here, like, how do you see, what does success look like for Provisions? Like, let's say it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now, like what could you, I don't know if you go into this in your strategic planning at all, but I'm curious how you would define success for what you do.
Well, first of all, we hope that people drink a lot of our Long Root Wit and Long Root Ale, because in a way, if they do that and they get to know the issues around it, that it's the reason why it exists and the problems it's solving, the more that farmers can take it on and the more fields will be grown, more acreage grown, the more carbon gets sucked down into the ground. And so that's just an example of, can we have, with what we know now, not just we as a company, but collectively as a community, there's so much information out there educating us on all these really hopeful pieces of information for how we can act differently going into the future. And so if we can adopt those practices, whether it's an individual, whether it's a company, whether it's an open mind for bringing in new ideas, new products, new ingredients, new crops, really maybe changing the mindset about having so many investors in companies dictating bottom line as the win, that we have to look at other wins beyond the bottom line, that maybe we can get to this place that consideration of some of these other factors like soil health, social fairness, animal welfare, all these things are something that we should have ingrained in our business practices. We look at Patagonia Provisions as a center for innovation and really finding solutions, highlighting solutions to problems out there. And if others can really start to adopt that, some of these ideas in a bigger way, we're a pretty small food company right now, but if the bigger food companies can start to take on some of these practices, if they can take a crop like Kernza that we put out there into the world and adopt it in a bigger scale and therefore grow more Kernza and have more acreage in the ground, that we really bring soil health into the system, and we've somehow influenced that by what we've brought to market, then that's a huge win. And that we really have people coming along this journey with us, really starting to make decisions that are better.
Yeah, I love that. And so I think you mentioned a few of the places where people, so Whole Foods, New Seasons Market. Where can folks find out more about Provisions and where can they purchase products?
So people can come to patagoniaprovisions.com. We have a separate URL from patagonia.com. So patagoniaprovisions.com. We can go to, you can get it at Patagonia stores. You can get it at Whole Foods on the West Coast and many Pacific Northwest and down into California, natural and organic stores. And we are expanding on the East Coast, so we'll be able to provide a list, but you'll be able to see that on our website, patagoniaprovisions.com.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.